Welcome to the Savage Fabrication YouTube channel. You're here with the Savage Fab Guy, my brother, DC Designs. Dalton Carter is also here doing all the film work. And today we're going to go over a real understanding of compressor maps. There's a lot of compressor maps out there. There are a lot of videos that talk about compressor maps. Some go really over the majority's heads, and a lot of the other ones are real basic and don't give you too much information about what's going on. And actually lead a lot of people in the wrong directions. I can assure you that I was led in the wrong direction for many years by what was on the internet, on the forums, as well as other videos. There just wasn't anything that really got into it. And I have came across some videos, one being Power Driven Diesel's Turbo School videos, which are very good. I have found a few math equations that need actually not tweaking, but just extra equations added in. And we're going to go over those things in this video. But we're going to start with understanding the base of what we got. We're going to, because this is a turbo diesel based business, we're going to use the 5.9 liter Cummins, which is a 359 cubic inch engine, to show you how to find out where you're at on a compressor map. Because just because the turbocharger is at high boost and your engine is screaming away and the exhaust sounds amazing doesn't mean you're making a lot of power. It just means a lot of stuff's going on. So we want to find out where we're actually at on a compressor map. And you are all over the map. When you're on boost, you don't get max flow. We're going to show you how to find out if you can get max flow. The same thing as if you're on boost, you might be over here. You could be over there, over there, over there, over there. You don't really know until you do the math and figure it out. And a lot of this base starts with the engine size. Now a lot of people like to take the engine size, split it in half, do the whole 4 strokes to 2 strokes, because there's only 1 intake stroke per 4 strokes and all that stuff. You don't need to do all that. There are calculators on the internet that make this way faster. You don't need to go that far into it. It's good to know it, but it's not going to help you out. It doesn't change the outcome of the answer. So there's a app, or not an app, but a site called racingcalcs.com that you can put in all your information. We're going to link the site in the description. We're going to use a few sites, but we're going to link the site in the description so you can put in all your information. And from here, we'll use that to start doing other math that we'll use the calculator app for to find out where we're at on the compressor. So first things first, we need to calculate the engine's naturally aspirated CFM. Because all a turbocharger is a density multiplier. So whatever the charger or the engine is ingesting naturally aspirated, the turbocharger multiplies it by compressing the same amount into a tighter space. This was really complicated for me to kind of grasp. For others, it might be really fast. And for some, they still might not get it. So we're just going to kind of go over it really quick. We have an intake runner. This intake runner, which is going to flow this direction, can only hold so much air. So if it held 1 cubic foot of air at atmospheric pressure, which is 14.7 psi, then that's all it can take. That's all that runner will basically say put in the cylinder. Now there's way more to it than this, but this is a really base explanation so we can understand what's going on. We want to make the motor, so at NA, the motor's 5.9 liters, so it'll pull in the 5.9 liters. This is say we had 6 of these in a row, we can do the 6 liters. What happens is that we need to get more air in the chamber. What a turbocharger does is it compresses a larger mass into a smaller area so the motor can now draw it in. So if we want to fill each cylinder with 2 liters to make the engine think it's twice as big, we need to compress 2 liters down to the same size that 1 liter of space takes up. And once we've compressed it to the space of the 1 liter, the engine can now draw the air into the chamber, and we can add an increased amount of fuel. And because we increase the amount of fuel in the chamber that's being burned, the power output goes up. So that's a really base explanation. If you have a really, if you want to make it makes the motor think it's bigger than it is. Remember, the runner stays the same size. It's a hard part, it's cast iron in our case, and it can only fit so much. So if we want to fit more through it, we need to compress. That's the beautiful part about air, is it's a compressible. Our engine's ingested liquid, we would have a problem. This wouldn't, and none of this turbocharger wouldn't work because it's not compressible. No, because we can compress a gas, we can take a larger amount of gas, compress it into a much smaller area, and then the engine can draw it into the cylinder. So we need to calculate the NACFM back to that. So we're going to use our little dilly app, and we're going to link this in the description. We're going to be using racingcalcs.com. Just go on your web browser, look it up. We're going to put in our information. 359 cubic inches. I had one for a while that used liters, which was really nice. Most of your diesel stuff's in liters that disappeared randomly a couple years ago. So this is what I got. 2,000 RPMs. We're going to keep the volumetric efficiency, the VE of the engine, the same. We should probably go over that. So VE in a percentage is if the cylinder is, again, 1 liter, and we're at 80% VE, 80%. That means on the intake stroke, out of 1 liter, we only filled that 1 liter to 80% capacity. That's because pop-up valve styles are an imperfect system. Air has weight, even though air is compressible, air has weight, and it takes time to get it to move. There are all kinds of cool tricks, like leaving the intake valve open after bottom dead center to continue to fill the cylinder. That's probably a topic for another video. But that's the explanation of volumetric efficiency. And this volumetric efficiency number, it changes a lot. On turbo diesels, that's a big thing that we've noticed between gas engines, or should say spark ignition, and diesel engines, is that the spark ignition motors, their VE, even with a turbocharger, seems to stay pretty relevant. And I believe that's because the choke point in most of your spark ignition systems, because of the RPMs that they can run, typically still stays in the valve train. So either the runner, the valve, or the amount of lift that the system has. That seems to be very consistent because they tend to run a lot more RPMs, so piston speed is higher, so the air speed through the port's higher, and it goes a lot higher than ours does, given it's a modern engine with modern size parts. Of course, this was probably a problem back in the 20s and 30s. On turbo diesels, the VE is basically controlled by a turbocharger. It is the camshaft for our engine. You'll see a lot of spark ignition guys say that, and it's true for that instance when the choke point seems to be in the valve train in the head, that you just, whenever you raise the boost up, the numbers just keep going up, and the graphs fall, and they do. There's plenty of supporting data for that. That does not happen realistically on turbo diesels. If we put this turbocharger on, which is an S362, and then we put this turbocharger on, which is S476, and we only flowed each one on the chassis dyno to the same pounds a minute. So we used this one to 65 pounds a minute, and we stopped the run, and we used this one to 65 pounds a minute and stopped the run. We're still going to have very different peak torque and peak horsepower points. They don't just static all roto tracks. They don't just roto track up, which I guess maybe a little drawing might be helpful. I'll erase it. But let's say this is this is wrong, there'd be a crossover. But let's just say you did a 20 pounds of boost on your spark ignition motor, and then you went to 30 pounds of boost. It's just gonna go up just like it did. It's very consistent. Not always the case. The argument against this is if you put really small turbochargers on, you can certainly change this. But that's usually what happens. What happens in turbo diesels is that the peak torque location is going up. No. Here's one turbocharger, and then we would go to this turbocharger here. What we would tend to see is a lot more torque production down low. Faster, and then it'll hit the peak torque real early and then start to fall. And the tighter the housing, the steeper this tends to be, which is interesting things that we've noted on the chassis dyno over time. Okay, it's a lot of information. Time to calculate CFM. Oh, okay, CFM. We're going to use 85% just for all of these. That's not what realistically happens. The VE is changing, and if you change your turbocharger, the VE changes at that same RPM, but we're going to use 85%. It's going to work. It's legible enough. use 85% VE for every single one of these calculations. And it makes it easy. It's easy for you to understand, easy for you to practice at home in the shop. You can print these up anywhere. I printed these up off Power Driven site because they had the biggest landscape ones that I could find, and they're super good guys. But they print up really nice, they're not fuzzy, easy to read, and we can zoom in on each one. The next constant that we're going to do, so we can teach, is we're going to limit this to a static 3.0 pressure ratio. So it's only going to run to a total of a 3.0 pressure ratio. We're going to go with pressure. But we're not going to go any higher, we're not going to go any lower, we're not going to calculate the rising pressure ratio, rising boost over time with engine RPM. That adds a lot of stuff to it that might make this video really, really long. So alright, so we're going to keep it 85% VE for all of it. So at 2,000 RPM, 85% VE on 359 cubic inch engine, 176.59 CF. Okay. I'm going to put in 3,000. And at 4 buckets. Alright, so many of you head guys out there that like ported heads and cams and all that stuff, I'm not anti any of that stuff. I like to use them properly. It's important that they're used properly. I think that they're sold to people that don't need them a lot of the times because of marketing. Like me or not, that's what I feel about it. They have a time and a place. And we'll go over that in the videos. But you head guys, and there's plenty of head charts out there. Let's use the 12 valve because it's obviously the worst head out of all of them. One, how do we have 85% VE in the 12 valve? It's real, it happens. We calculated it. They'll do 80 to 85% on the VE. But actually, it's going to be even higher at peak torque because peak horsepower, what we're looking at right now, is not the peak VE of the system. The peak VE, volumetric efficiency, happens at peak torque. That's a whole other deal. We're just talking about compressor maps and flow. So what happens if you go on, this is it's a law of, I would say, the law of physics, is you can go on PG&E's website and look at pipe sizes, and depending on the pipe size, it'll flow a certain CFM at a certain pressure. As the pressure in the pipe goes up, that same size pipe flows more. We see the same thing on turbo diesel heads. The 12 valve head consistently at its 0.28 inches of lift, I think it's 0.28 inches of valve lift, it's pretty abysmal, will flow way more CFM than 353 CFM. Pretty crazy. Because on the charts it shows the head at 20 inches of depression, which is sea level, as far as 14.7 psi. It's actually a little bit below sea level. They'll flow 130 CFM, and at 2,000 RPMs, the engine's already consuming more than 130 CFM. So you have to, either you believe that the head is junk, but if you believe the head only flows 130 CFM, then at 2,000 RPMs, the engine essentially would not be working, and it does. So what happens is, because the port's a fixed size, we increase the pressure in the system with the turbocharger, and that port now flows more. And you can look this up. PG&E has the graphs because they need to know how small of a pipe they can run to go miles and miles and miles and miles, because each time the pipe gets bigger, the pipe gets more expensive, and they're trying to save costs to their customers and to themselves and everything else, so they need to know. And they have graphs. It's all done. There's papers on it. We can even maybe put the picture. I have the picture on my phone. We can put the picture probably in the video to show you. But as the pressure in the system goes up, the CFM goes up with it. And it doesn't mean that the CFM just goes up, it means that the CFM capacity, how much you can go up to, increases. So that's really important. That's why this all works. If you ran these things at low boost, you'd have problems. If low boost and high RPMs, you would need a lot of head porting, cam, all that stuff to make it work right. But because we run a ton of boost, because we can, turbo diesels, we get around some of that stuff with that. So here are CFM numbers. We're going to run a 3.0 pressure ratio. Let's go over pressure ratios. Pressure ratio is your gauge pressure plus atmospheric pressure divided by atmospheric pressure. And that's technically incorrect, but for doing math, it works just fine. Technically, you're supposed to do the atmospheric pressure plus gauge pressure divided by pressure. You're supposed to calculate it after the filter, which is a pressure drop, versus the total atmospheric pressure and all that stuff. And it really doesn't do anything unless you're trying to program an engine management system. You don't really need it too much. We can do this as far as getting pretty close to what we should expect to see either on the dyno or when we're trying to pick a turbocharger. So 3.0 pressure ratio, and if you want to reverse it, it's going to be 3.0 times 14.7 divided by, or minus 14.7, sorry. So we'll write this out. 3 14.7 minus 14.7. Oops. Let's see. 29.4 pounds of boost. Or we'll call it that. Yeah, should we do that? Just to make it consistent. PSIG. If you ever look at some of the terminology, there'll be APSI or PSIG. It's absolute PSI, which is 29.4 plus 14.7, or whatever your atmospheric pressure is. If you're at higher elevations, your atmospheric pressure is less, and you want to account for that. There's plenty of charts that show you per 1,000 feet of elevation how much pressure drop there is, as well as you can look at your local airport. All the airports publish daily online, almost live data, what all the atmospheric conditions are. And if you have one that's fairly close to you, go use that. And it's really helpful to use that for when you're doing dyno stuff or going to the drag strip. That was kind of an old hot rodders thing. They would look at the local airport's weather report to figure out how to start jetting for the day at the track. But your local airport publishes all this stuff daily, a lot of times live. That way pilots know how much weight they can carry, how much fuel they need, all that fun stuff. So 2,000 RPMs, we're expected to have 30 pounds of boost. That's realistic. Shouldn't be a problem for pretty much anybody unless you're running something that's really big. 2,000 RPMs, 30 pounds of boost. 3,000 RPMs, the thing's now wastegated to 30 pounds of boost. 4,000 RPMs, it's wastegated to 30 pounds of boost. So how do we find out at 3.0 pressure ratio where we're at? Because a lot of times you just draw this line and you'd be like, well, I'm on this line and I'm driving really hard, and it feels good, feel like I'm right there. I used to do that. You might say that you don't currently, but I think a lot of us kind of used to do that when we look at a map and the thing was making all kinds of wicked noises. We would say we're over there, and then eventually, I think more so than not, we would get on a dyno at some point, or we get on the drag strip, and we wouldn't go as fast as we wanted to go, or we wouldn't make the power we want to make, and we were like, what is up? We need more air. Sorry, the post office showed up. We had to go collect our packages, and I kind of lost where I was at a little bit. But I know we were talking about track times, dyno numbers, and the number one thing that I hear as soon as someone doesn't run the track time that they want, or they don't get the dyno number they want, it doesn't matter if it's this dyno, a different dyno, wherever it is, the first thing 90% of the time that I hear is that I need more air. And I always kind of ask them, have you plotted where you're at on the map? And you know what the response is? No. They say that EGTs are high, so they need more air, which is a whole other thing. EGTs and more air don't always go together. That is a huge kind of misconception. There's so much more that goes in EGTs. But plug yourself on a Met. Usually the answer is no. I ask them, do you want me to show you how? So here we're going to do it. So 3.0 pressure ratio, 5.9 liter Cummins, 85% volumetric efficiency. Yes, the 12 valve can run 85% B. We've calculated it. We've seen it on our inertia dyno, believe it or not, which is a really not forgiving dyno. It's hurt my feelings many times. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pressure ratio and we are going to multiply it by our compressor efficiency. This is the part where you got to do it a few times because we don't know where we're at yet. So we need to multiply this a few times to kind of get an idea of where we're at on the map, what's realistic. So we got, this is where a dynograph comes in handy because you have the horsepower at that engine RPM. So let's see. Let's just do the math. We'll use the 62 first, just because we're going to end up in this area probably a lot easier. So we're going to take 3.0. We're going to follow it over. Let's say we're in this island here. This is the 74% efficiency island. So we take 3.0. 0.0 times 0.74. This is going to give us our density ratio. 3.0 times 0.74. So our density ratio without any intercooling after the turbocharger is currently 2.22 dR. The density ratio is what's multiplying the size of our engine. So at 30 pounds of boost, the motor will currently think that it's 2 times as big as it normally is. How you can test this is if you take the engine size, multiply it by 2.22, and then run it back through the calculator at 85% VE, note the CFM numbers, and then go and take your 176.59 CFM, 264.89 CFM, etc., multiply by the density ratio, you'll find that you come out with the exact same CFM. A really kind of a funny statement that I like to make is that an 800 horsepower, 850 horsepower 5.9 liter thinks it's a 30 liter engine. I believe that's what it is. Yeah, essentially it thinks that it would take a normally aspirated 30 liter engine turning 3,000 RPMs to consume the same amount of air that the 5.9 liter was doing at 850 horsepower at the time. It's pretty crazy, right? Because you wouldn't take a 30 liter to 3,000 RPMs. Probably get some parts going pretty far. So it's amazing what these small engines can do. But this is definitely not a good number. 30 pounds of boost, and for our 30 pounds of boost in return, we're only getting a 2.22 DR. That's not very good. Luckily, we got intercoolers, and
Unless you have a first gen.
Non-intercooled first gen. Yeah, so that's a big thing, I guess, if you want to go the first gen community, 89 to 91. And some may say 91s have intercoolers. No, 91.5s have intercoolers. 91s don't. 91s have the new grill. I still think they even have the old axle set. I may be wrong. They still might. I think the 91s can actually come with the new grill, but will still can come with, and 4x4 and an auto can still come with the 307 gear ratios. And I think even some of the two-wheel drives have the 307 gear ratios. So you got to watch that. But for non-intercooled first gens, this is where you're at. You don't get no more than that. It's 30 pounds of boost, and you're only getting that it's rough. It makes the thing screaming. It's making a lot of noise, especially with the autos with no converter unlock. Now those things whine to the moon. They feel good, and the trucks don't weigh a whole lot, so they do feel fairly quick. But it's magical stuff happens with the intercooler. So we're going to use second-gen intercoolers. We can also give you data on third-gen intercoolers. I don't have as much data on the third-gen intercooler, but I could probably get you in the wheelhouse of what it's doing. So we're going to use the air-to-air intercooler on a second-gen Dodge. It's a fairly large intercooler, and it will average between 40% and 50% intercooling efficiency. That's about the average. And there's more to it, but those numbers work well. The hotter the compressor outlet temps get, the better the intercooler works. It sounds kind of weird, but you want to remember the greater the difference between the air going through the intercooler versus the outside air temperature, the faster the heat transmission occurs. So as things get hotter, the intercooler actually starts to increase in efficiency. The closer the temperature is coming out of the compressor versus the outside air going across the intercooler, the less efficient the intercooler is. So we're going to use 45%. That works pretty good. Just like we're going to keep this a fixed number, we are going to keep our intercooler's efficiency a fixed number, just for ease of doing the math. Because I want you guys to play with this. Print up maps. Draw lines. I can show you guys maps that I've drawn lines, and on turbo diesels, they tend to just be unless it's gated, they tend to kind of be like a straight line up the thing until they kind of hit a peak somewhere up here where the exhaust energy versus rotor speed taps out. But on like a waste-gated charger, say that waste-gated charger set to gate will continue to open more and more even though the engine's exhaust CFM is going up because the RPM is going up, the gate just opens farther and farther and it'll hold us at a steady 30 pounds of boost. I don't recommend running your peak boost at 30 pounds, it's kind of low for a turbo diesel, but we're using it because that gives us the widest range to play with on our sheets here. So we're going to take our 2.22 density ratio, and now we're going to multiply it because we're adding by 1.45. So it's going to be 2.22 times 1.45 because we're gaining. We're cooling the air charge down. It's becoming more dense, not less dense. So the 1 means we're gaining. Essentially a 0 here means we are losing because in this instance the air is getting hotter through the diffusion zone in the compressor. And in this instance the air is condensing through the intercooler. Yeah. So we're going to take our 2.22 times 0.45. Oops. 2.22 times 1.45 gives us a new net density ratio of 3.219. That is better. 3.219. Okay. So that's the number that we're after. That looks a lot better. That actually looks really good because it's above our pressure ratio. We're getting a higher density ratio in this case at the 74% efficiency island than what our pressure ratio is. So we're only running 30 pounds of boost, but we're getting the equivalent density ratio as if we were running a higher boost pressure to buff that up because the intercooler is so good, which is really cool. And for math reasons, if you want to just kind of look at things really quick, this will balance itself out, meaning the density ratio and the pressure ratio will essentially be the exact same at 70%. Once you start going below 70% on the compressor efficiency, there's basically you start to net a loss in the density ratio. That sounds bad, but it's not as bad as you think because if we wanted to go breathe past this or run a higher pressure ratio, we can still keep bumping the boost pressure up. And even though our total net outcome is going to be a lower density ratio than the pressure ratio, we will still have more density ratio than if we ran a lower boost pressure number. There's a point where that it flip-flops, but it does take a little bit. So this tends to be a lot of your OEM manufacturers. They size the turbocharger to where at the peak power and peak RPM that they give you, or at least the peak map for that compressor for the OEM, they'll only map at the 66%. And you see that most of your maps will only be mapped out to 66%. These ones here, down low, we got a 58 there, 56 here. And the BorgWarner is not consistent on their maps. They'll test some chargers to this point, some to the other point, and that might be due to a rotor speed thing. They just don't want you running the rotor speed that far. Alright, so the next really cool thing that we do though is now that we know our density ratio, and this is all theoretical still, we have to do this, find out where we land, and see if what we calculated was even right, because we're gonna do the math next. You're gonna take 3.219 times whatever CFM you want. We're gonna use 2,000, and that's gonna give you the total CFM that the engine's consuming. So we're gonna take the 3.219, we're gonna use 2,000 RPMs and calculate it. 3.219 times 176.59. Oops. I am not doing it well. 176.59. So at 2,000 RPMs and a 3.219 density ratio, we have a total CFM flow of 568.44 CFM. Now, this is the really important part, and well, there's two really important parts that I think get missed pretty often. Places that do have you do this part, they have you convert it using SAE a lot of the times, and other places have you convert it using whatever your outside air density is. Because we're at sea level here, this is going to make this kind of easier. I would reference, if you're at high elevation, I would reference the loss. I would do the math at sea level, and then net the loss between the atmospheric pressures in the two places as far as how many the weight is. If you lost, a quarter of a pound, or whatever you want to call it, at your higher elevation, then I would knock the same quarter pound off. But what we're going to do next is we need to know the air coming out of the intercooler's temperature. And the only way to do that is on newer diesels, they do have IATs after the intercooler, and on your older ones you can use an EGT probe or like a transmission, the transmission temp gauges. The only thing with the trans temp gauges is they respond real slow compared to the EGT probe. The EGT probe transfers much faster. I'm going to a chart that has the air weight by temperature. One moment. We'll put up a picture of this on the video, but the engineeringtoolbox.com has the air's weight as well as in both pounds foot cubed and kilogram meter cubed by temperature. So we're probably gonna, after the intercooler, depending on how hot it is outside, we're just gonna use 100 degrees. So we have 100 degree air coming out of the intercooler, feeding our engine. So at 100 degrees, IAT post intercooler, the air weighs 0.07 pounds cubed foot. Kind of shorten that stuff up, but we can pounds cubed foot. Not as bad, but just know it's 0.07 pounds cubic foot at 100 degree air coming out. Now, during the summertime, on average, we'll see between 120 to 140 degrees after the intercooler, and right now, with it being wintertime, we average 60 to 80 degrees after the intercooler. So you can see how the time of the year and your location plays a big role in this. So what we're going to do is take the 568.44 and multiply it by the 0.07. So 568.44 times 0.07. It's going to give us 39.79 pounds a minute. Isn't that rude? Okay. So we're gonna look at our 62 mat. 40 pounds a minute It's right here. So we're going to go 40 pounds a minute up, 3.0 pressure ratio, and we are right on the 74% line. It's up to you if you wanted to go back and rerun this with the 72% compressor efficiency. It will actually land you, it's going to land you more, something funky. It's going to land you more centered between the 74 and the 72, but you're so close. Remember, if you were to graph the transition through the compressor efficiencies, it's going to graph pretty transitionally. So like 0.72 here to 0.74 here, we're on the line, we're probably 0.729. Is it going to make a big difference to go rerun that number? Probably not. So we're right here at 2,000 RPMs. So now we have most of the math done. Remember, this is just for math purposes. We're not going to be changing the VE per RPM or any of that stuff. If we came back though, that same 30 pounds of boost, whoops, I put that totally in the wrong spot. 40 pounds, Rio, we're actually right here. Disregard that one. Let me put a black mark over it so you can't see it. We are not there. Right here. So that's not a bad setup. That's a pretty happy turbocharger right there. And there's a lot of room to go. If we did that same thing on the 476, 3.0 at 40 pounds, so if you're at 2,000 RPMs and you have 30 pounds of boost with your 5.9 liter engine, at 40, we are here. We are in the surge area. We're in an area of unstable flow. This does not mean the turbocharger goes into surge. This means that there's the probability for the turbocharger to go into surge. They make these maps pretty foolproof. The actual surge line, the real unstable surge line, is more than likely over here somewhere. The more than likely choke line is over here somewhere. They put safety margin in so they're not having to fix these things all the time. Because if they put the line there, we would run there. We would do that. So these are safety margins. I don't know what their safety factor is as far as the percentage of that they shrink this thing. But this is what if you were on the 476 and you had 30 pounds of boost at 2,000 RPMs, you're here. That's not really desirable. It's not that the charge temps are hot. This doesn't seem to have like super big impact on the charge temps. You need a compressor outlet temp gauge to really monitor that stuff properly. But if you have the tube between the two turbochargers and this was your main operating area, say if you pulled most grades or did most things and for the most part you were 30 pounds of boost and you want optimum performance, this is going to be better to work. So let's continue plotting. We're going to go up 3,000 RPMs. We're just going to repeat the process. So we've already figured out our density ratio. This is going to be static, it's not changing. And we're going to do, let's go do 4,000 RPMs. So the pressure is staying the same, but the engine's revving up. Going down the track. We're going down the drag strip. We've gone from 2,000 to 4,000 RPMs. We're going to take the same 3.219 times 353.18. Make sure that was right. 3.21 times 353. So by increasing the engine RPMs, 2,000 RPMs at the same boost pressure, we've gone from 568.44 CFM. I'm going to put this down here just in case we do this wrong. To 1,136.88 CFM. Oh, it's rough. So we didn't change the boost pressure, we didn't change anything. All we do is rev the engine higher. So instead of instead of pulling air in, so rev the engine higher. the air is now drawing more air over in the same amount of time. In the same 1 minute of time, the engine rotates twice as fast, and we're pulling in a lot more air. And what's neat is that's going to move us way over here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say that the air is still 100 degrees. The only other thing though is we probably want to recalculate this. What I like to do is we're going to run this first. We're going to see where that puts us so we can get an idea of what island we're probably close to. So we're going to take that number, multiply by the 0.07. That gives us 79. Pounds min. That is going to put us, yeah, that's not looking good. That's gonna put us right here. So, I guess, all right, so we were talking about earlier, my brother mentioned it, how the numbers are pretty consistent as far as the distance traveled. The thing that isn't consistent as far as distance traveled is how much we travel per multiplication. The growth rate of that is pretty cool to look at, because I guess we'll do this one really quick and we'll plot it, but this one here is, I don't believe it's going to plot in the middle, and then we'd have to backtrack this. So one thing to note though is we are way over here. This number is wrong. You can't accept that number, because the compressor efficiency is not even remotely close to what it was. When we landed here, we got, to be honest, we got lucky on that first time to land right there. I didn't pre-plan that. I'm happy I did, because I didn't have to redo it. But the one that we do have to redo, or we can redo, is this one. This one is not on the map. This doesn't mean the turbo blows up.
Dang.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people have pulled 80 pounds a minute or maybe close to it through a 62. It doesn't mean it blows up. It does mean it's in the danger zone. Like, it could certainly fail, but it doesn't mean that it won't do it one or a few times. So, but this isn't, the number is invalid because the compressor efficiency that we use to find the density ratio that multiplied by the NaCFM is not the same. It changed drastically. It didn't even change by 0.02 or 0.04, it changed by a whole number. When you're out here, and you will operate here if you are in competition with your truck or drag car, whatever the diesel engine's in, you will operate in these zones. And what you got to do in these zones is you usually use a dynograph or gauge data to actually figure out what the compressor efficiency is. Because you have to run the equations quite a few times to actually start making a new compressor map or continuing the plotting of this thing out in those areas. But we know that this far out we're at 62%, so over here is probably realistically, it doesn't drop off as crazy as you think. There's actually like a lower limitation. It just won't go below. What you'll find is the compressor just goes in the choke flow and it just won't breathe any more air. The efficiency doesn't continue to just fall. Because if you start getting it really low, it just starts to really not make any sense at all. So probably 58% to 60% is what that is. So we can go back and say at 3.0, you're going to see some crazy stuff. Okay, so we are back. Our camera battery died and we only got one camera battery. And the length of time it took to charge it was the same amount of time it took for it to get mighty cold. I don't know if you can see on video. It's cold enough you can see your breath, and we're all in jackets now. So where we were at was talking about these points, and the big thing was, oh, we got a laser now too. We're high tech. We were talking about how this point's not valid. Look at that, that's cool. Why is it not valid? It's not valid because we calculated that point using 74% compressor efficiency, and point does not land in a 74% compressor efficiency. So it's null, it's not valid, it's incorrect, and this is not what we would actually be seeing. So the next thing that we can do though is we can calculate the 3000 RPM one at 264.89 CFM. So it's 264.89 CFM. Remember, that is the NaCFM of this 5.9 liter engine at an 85% volumetric efficiency. So it's 264.89 times our density ratio of 3.219. And remember, we figured out the density ratio by taking our pressure ratio, multiplying it by one of the compressor efficiencies. This is a loss, so it's going to be a the compressor efficiency, so in this case 0.74. And from there we get our density ratio. Our base density ratio does not look that fantastic and will not match anything that you try and do on a chassis dyno or a drag strip, because, well, it won't do it if the vehicle that is going down the drag strip or running on the rollers has an intercooler. So we got to add in the intercooler. So the intercooler in this case is 45% efficient. It's a gain. So we take our 2.22 multiplied by what we gain through the intercooler, 1.45 or 45% efficiency gain, gives us the 3.219. 264.89 CFM at 3,000 RPMs multiplied by 3.219 for the density ratio. We'll do that real quick with our trusty calculator. 64.89 times 3.219 gives us, I wrote it down, sorry for the bad writing, 0.68 CF. So that's what we get. We're going to take our 852.68 CFM because the engine's consuming that much air by volume. Now we need to find the mass of the air. So what does each one of these cubes weigh in terms of weight? So we need to find out what the temperature of the air is going into the inlet valve. You can usually backwork this using dynagraphs. Or if you record the gauge data while going down a drag strip, you can get closer. Realistically, the best way to do this is to use a dynagraph data. If you don't have a IAT gauge after the intercooler. So we're using 100 degrees. 100 degrees after intercooler means that the air weighs 0.07 pounds per cube foot. 852.68 cubic feet. We're going to take the 852.68 multiplied by 0.07. That gives us 59. What is that? That gives us, I'll have to smear what's below it. 59.68 pounds minute. We want to verify this on our map. We want to make sure that where this lands is on the island that we calculated the density ratio from. So we are going to go essentially to 60 pounds a minute, come up to 3.0. That lands us right here, which is on the 74% compressor efficiency island, meaning that that calculation is valid. So if in fact we have 85% VE, if in fact we're at sea level and our atmospheric pressure is 14.7 and our pressure gauge is accurate, 30 pounds boost, 29.4 PSI gauge, then the engine is effectively consuming, and temps after the intercooler are 100 degrees. And the engine is in fact consuming 60 pounds a minute. I know I was saying before that these wouldn't plot out the same, and they look like they plot out the same, but they won't. The reason why they won't is this guy's in the wrong spot. So remember how we were saying this one's not valid? This thing's probably like 58%, 60% compressor efficiency. It's not good, and we got to rework that one. So it just can't be there. But that's what you got to do. You need to figure out, like, this is why you do this stuff. Because say we did this one, and this one landed in the 76%. Well, then we would need to go back and redo the density ratio to find out where it is. Same as if it landed over in the 70% area. The math, those 0.01s add up to a lot when you're talking about upwards of 800 and 1,000 CFM. I mean, that's only 80 pounds a minute. Just see what happens when you get up into the 117 plus pounds a minute area. It can be a lot. So what we'll do on the next episode is we are going to calculate this one a few times, and we are going to figure out exactly, mathematically, where that point is going to land with this particular turbocharger. Real quick, before we go, we can come back to the 476 SXE unit, and we will also look at both of these points. So at 3,000 RPMs, 30 pounds of boost, 85% VE, 100 degree intercooler outlet temperature, 60 pounds. Lands right here on the 72% compressor efficiency area. So we're actually pretty close in this one. So 60, and come up. This is actually pretty close. Now, this point here would actually need to be recalculated because the compressor is a lot less efficient than 74. This is pretty close. If we wanted to rerun it and really dial it in, we could, but we're probably going to see too much movement there. And then we'll take a look at the 80 pound number at 4,000 RPMs, and 30 pounds of boost. This is at 80. If we follow this up, it lands us in the 78% area. Yes, 78%. So we would actually definitely want to recalculate that. When we recalculate it at 78%, there's a high probability that we're actually going to move into the 76% island, and then just recalculate at 76% to figure out where exactly in the 76% island we're landing on the 3.0 pressure ratio area. This one would need to be recalculated because it's really far off. This one is actually probably going to land in this area, and this probably comes just from doing this a lot. This is kind of what I do in my spare time. This one at 72% probably won't move a whole lot. I mean, more than likely it'll probably land actually right on the 72, the 74 line. It's a high probability of that. And the other thing that you can infer real quick is that trying to operate the 76 at 30 pounds of boost at 2,000 RPMs is going to take a lot of exhaust work versus operating the 62 at 30 pounds of boost and 2,000 RPMs is going to be a much more efficient charger. So in this case, it's going to be taking more work energy from exhaust gas to do this, meaning it's going to be less friendly to drive, where this is going to feel more natural and close to an OEM feel, just with more power when it's operating in that condition. So you can infer from this that if I was towing at 2,000 RPMs and 30 pounds of boost, this is going to be a much more enjoyable turbocharger with lower EGTs than this one would be. Where things get different is when we start obviously getting up into the higher flow rates, where the compressor efficiency changes between the two of them, as well as we start to run out of compressor on the other one, and running out of compressor is an air speed dealio. So like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want to know when part 2 comes up. And in part 2, we're going to go over how to find where this point really is. And we'll see about, maybe if you guys want to, we'll figure out where this one's at. And if you have any turbochargers that have maps available, please let us know, and we'll print them up and we'll put them on this board. Maybe give us a scenario, an engine size that preferably diesel. I do not know the VE of the Duramax and the Power Stroke engines, as well as the 5.9 and 6.7s. I can tell you they do run very well, volumetric efficiency wise, because of their head design. They've got better port geometry than we do with the Cummins, so their VEs tend to be a little bit better. But we can run a lot of boost. Our head just seems to stay down, and all our parts stay together. So you can kind of correct bad VE with a lot of boost pressure. There's nothing wrong with boost pressure. I love the stuff. So please stay tuned for the next one. This is the Savage Fab Guy. All the editing is done by DC Designs. He's my brother. Also works here with me every day, building turbochargers, drilling, tapping covers, run the plasma table. You name it, it's teamwork. So, hope you enjoyed, and you have a good day.